My research interests, and I use a very small r, although there's a capital R in that, relate to change leadership. I'm a systems thinking practitioner. I work mainly with theory of constraints and systems dynamics to orientate you in the kind of academic worlds that I work in. And I spend my life helping chief executives and chairs figure out how to solve problems at an organisational level so that they stay solved and don't cause new problems to break out. That last bit's the tricky bit, as you all know. I deliberately take a research-based approach. I was saying over there over lunch, sharing the way I think keeps me honest, which is why I'm here. To kind of expose what I do and how I do it to you is both simultaneously very scary, but also my quality stamp, if that makes sense. And mostly it's an action research-based approach. So I've become increasingly interested in what the organisations I work with have in common before they get to me. So this isn't a sales pitch, this is not about what I did for them, this is about what happened before they decided that they were stuck. I work across sectors, public, private, third sector. This is part of a bigger data set, and I've pulled out 5 organisations within the third sector that I've worked with recently to go through that with you. So they're all voluntary sector organisations, 5 case organisations, all leaders in their field, mix of regional, national, international, 1 million to 20 million, in all cases working at very senior levels, all wanted their organisations and articulated their need for their organisations to be sustainable today and in the future, and that's where the dilemma comes from. Do we spend our time making today better, or actually do we keep an eye for the future, and how do we balance that? In all cases, the decisions they'd made prior to getting to me, that's not me saying they were all brilliant after me, but the decisions they made before getting to me had serious negative effects on the performance of their organisations. So my definition of organisational paralysis is a current operating reality in which it is impossible, perception of impossibility, to carry on doing what we're doing. We can't stop what we're doing and go back again, and we can't stay where we are. So 5 examples. I'm just going to whiz through them. The first one had seen seismic change as a result of the Health and Social Care Act, when charities could then become what became any qualified provider from any willing provider, and had taken steps to commercialise what they did and enter that field. It had led to hemorrhaging money, but they couldn't stop what they were doing without financial risk, because if they didn't win these big contracts, a competitor would. But to carry on doing what they were doing was causing financial loss and being propped up by the rest of the parts of the organisation. So financially unsustainable, but had to protect market share. Second organisation, a little bit smaller, financially unsustainable in the medium term. Large contract cut overnight, but the reason we get other funding is because of that contract, so we will carry on funding that work at our own cost out of trading profit. We can't do that for long. So it's financially unsustainable, but we have to protect our reputation and our ability to win in other areas. Third one, high impact, high probability financial risk. Closure on the 12-month horizon, but personal reputation's at stake here. This is a national organisation. Their current course of action had been to not do anything as a response to, again, government funding cuts. It will be fine approach. And it will be fine, having gone on for several years. At some point, you have to decide it's not fine anymore. That was the same with the fourth one as well. High impact, high probability, financial and reputational risk here. This organisation couldn't be allowed to fail. It's linked into Parliament and national policy, couldn't be allowed to fail, but the do-nothing policy. And then the last one, again, high impact, high probability, financial risk. This had been financially unsustainable, again, for a number of years. At some point, you have to look at it. So very difficult environments for these senior people to be working within and making decisions. Even making the decision to do nothing is still a decision. And the implications of those decisions is raging conflict, in one example, between departments of that organisation. In another one, enormous staff turnover. So the consequential effects of those strategies causing pain. And I'm interested in why. Is there something in common? Is there a pattern? If there is a pattern, what's the pattern? And what's causing the pattern? And what might, for today, what might the implications from a change leadership perspective be for the sector? Quick note about pattern. I'm particularly interested in the second one. A repeating unit of shape or form, but can also be thought of as the skeleton that organises the parts of a composition. Now, for me, in what I'm going to talk about over the next few slides, that's a pattern of thinking, not a pattern of design. So the methodology I've used to analyse the kind of inset data. So when I start working with a client, or even actually before I start working with a client, we spend about half a day unpicking the solution that they're bringing me in for. There's a truism in consulting that the problem the client thinks is the problem actually isn't the problem at all. That's not good for me to solve a problem that's going to cause more problems. So I spend half a day with clients actually unpicking what's the problem if this piece of work is the solution. Just about always get down to actually that kind of previous 6 months, previous 3 years, looking at those decisions and the consequences of decisions that have been made. And I put all of that data through a construct called an evaporating cloud, which you're going to see a lot of over the next few slides. This isn't a training exercise, but I can evangelise about this till the cows come home, so see me afterwards. I've developed an individual cloud for each case organisation. You then merge them and make a composite cloud, and from that you end up with a core generic cloud, and that's the one I'm going to go through. So all organisations A, 5 boxes in a cloud, always labelled the same way, so we're just going to go through it and create it. All organisations wanted to be more successful today and in the future because they needed to, and one of the ways they needed to do that, in order to do that, they needed to ensure all the parts of their organisations met their individual objectives. Why? It sounds very sensible, but one of the things the cloud does is to get those assumptions out. Why? If we need to be successful today, do we need to make sure all the parts meet their current objectives? Well, it's the way we manage cost. It's the way we manage efficiency. It's the way people get taught to manage it. It's the way they've always done it. It's the way they're measured. It's what got them promoted, managing their silo budget. And it's the way they manage their departments. And in order to ensure all parts meet those individual objectives, and at any point jump in and say, I'm not buying it, we must manage change functionally. Must manage change functionally. So in order to A, we must B. In order to B, we must manage change functionally. Because it's the basis of how budgets and business plans are judged. I'm your chief exec, you give me your budgets. I have a look at them, I give you more resource. Or I take resource away from you. It's how efficiency savings are made. It's how we apply investment and resources. It's how I control change in my organisation. It's how I was managed on the way up. It's probably what got me promoted. It's also what everybody does. It's what I was taught at business school. It's what I've always done. On the other hand, I also have to make sure my organisation is successful in the future. And in order to do that, I must accurately adapt to external change. Why? Because I've got to ensure the long-term success of my organisation. I've got to always be valuable to customers. I've got to be relevant. I've got to recognise new market opportunities and actually market threat as well. It's not in there. It's my job to do that as a chief exec or a chair. It's how I'm measured. My job depends on it. And actually, if my job depends on it, my career depends on it. And in order to accurately adapt to external change, I must manage change systemically. Why? because my organisation is an interdependent system. No part is truly independent from any other part. So if I change one bit, or I allow change in one bit, it changes all the other bits too. I've got to ensure those changes are necessary and sufficient to achieving what we're trying to achieve without causing new problems. I'm the only one who can change what we do and how we do it. And now here we're starting to move into second order change. Change of potentially mission, not vision necessarily, but fundamental change of what this organisation is going to do to achieve its vision if the world outside the door has changed. It's my job to recognise that. And it's my job to transform my organisation if that's what's required. Does that make sense? Kind of looking for nods. And therein you have the power of an evaporating cloud. It forces choice. I can either be A, B, D, or I can be A, C, D prime. I can't do both. It's not possible to manage one change functionally and systemically at the same time. And my clients, I thought, were managing change functionally. They'd seen something in the external environment, they'd responded to it, but they'd responded in a discrete part of their organisation. That had then had adverse consequences in other parts of the organisation. The question is, why? The implication is that if you manage change functionally when it should be managed systemically, then there are implications elsewhere in the organisation, or potentially your network. You could expand the boundaries of your system. And if there are implications elsewhere, then you end up with very visible examples of conflict, business risk, paralysis that I was talking about earlier on. So what causes it? Limitations, this is 5 organisations, and you only have my word, this is part of a bigger data set, so you have to throw that out the window. This is 5 organisations, so this is working up to more of a hypothesis than conclusive findings. D, manage change functionally. That paradigm, that pattern, that mental pattern is always first order change. So what do we mean by first order change? I mean incremental, developmental, faster horses, doing something slightly differently to achieve more of the same, dealing with a problem to get us back on track to the same place we were already going to. Systemic change, second order change, changing what we do, how we do it, changing behaviours, changing processes, changing rules, changing interdependencies, bigger change. If the paradigm is always first order change, and C assumes that chief executives and chairs have competency to correctly identify the nature and the implication of the change. Everybody has horizon scanning on their job description. Are they competent to do that? It assumes that they've got competency to work out what to change in their organisation as a response, what to change it to, and how to make it happen without causing new problems. Most chairs and chief execs, by the time they've read that sentence, would have said, yeah, I think that's in your bit of the organisation, so you go and have a think about that. Let's be kind. Let's assume that I have that competency. That successfully gets me to C. I have the blueprint for accurate adaptation to change. I have to get to D prime. The problem is I can't get to D prime because the dominance of that first order paradigm in D prevents me from assuming or having any comprehension that my organisation is an interdependent system. Because if I agree with that, I've got to go and change B. I've got to go and actually take every part of my organisation and reconfigure it. I've got to get down in the weeds. I'm the chief executive. I don't do that. You do that. It's mostly in your department. You go and think about that. But it also assumes that there's capability to lead transformational change. So even if I have the blueprint at C and I can comprehend my organisation as a system, I know you're really difficult. I'm never going to get this past you. Go and have a think about it in your silo, come back to me. And within the case studies, all of this happening, but over a period of months, years. This isn't as personal, I just made it. So, if the dominant paradigm's always first order change, assuming the leader does correctly identify what they need to do, but they can't comprehend the organisation as a system, or potentially can but can't actually implement, then they push change back up functionally. So within 5 case organisations, all 5 had failed to accurately achieve, it should say C actually, forgive me, it was late night last night, I was still analysing data, achieve C. They hadn't accurately adapted to external change because they hadn't accurately identified the seismic nature and the implications of that change. Some of you will be familiar, there's a story about frogs on a pond. Do you all know it? Shall I revisit it very quickly? Frogs at one end of the pond, pondweed at the other. The pond's growing, I can't do the maths. Pondweed is growing at a certain rate, turns out to be exponential rate. It takes 1 day to take the second half of the pond and the frog paradise is over forever. So I've spent time thinking, was this an inability to see exponential change? Because these were exponential changes that have happened in the market for the third sector over the last few years. And I don't think it is. I think this is an ability to actually perceive change at all and think at a systems level. It doesn't matter whether it's exponential or not, because change affects the whole system. It doesn't matter how fast the change is, it's still going to affect the whole organisation. So that doesn't wash with me. All 5 of them were later able to realise the implications of the change and their response to it to date, but they needed help to figure out what they did about it. That's where consulting support comes in. 2 of them have gone on to manage change systemically. They have completely reinvented their organisations from the bottom up, including B, the way the bits are measured. They're still measuring in bits because you have to. Gap accounting means you've got to carry on doing that. But they've changed the interrelationships and the measures between the parts. 3 continue to wrestle with the implications of second order change for their organisation. One of them, speaking to the chair very recently, said, so how are you moving forward? And I, will tell you, I did a very successful piece of work for them and they were delighted. It wasn't the solution. It was a solution. It wasn't the solution. And the response came back saying, we've opted for managed decline. We'll be closing within the year. This is a national organisation. So what is it that's caused that? And we can play around with it. They could see what they needed to do. They agreed with what they needed to do. They just couldn't do it. So, data I've got suggests that the D paradigm, to assume all change is functional, first order, local, can be implemented without negative impact somewhere else in the organisation, is causing leaders to inaccurately adapt to external change. If the change is accurately assessed, even if it is, then the D paradigm, first order functional change, boundaries any change that they do agree to happen within a functional silo. And I don't know whether any of you have been there. I have been there, trying to lead organisational change as the leader of a functional silo, and you can't do it because you won't change. And I have no authority over you. Going back to the previous speaker, I have no the rules-based authority over you, so you don't have to do it. So that means I can't do my job either. So either you win or I win, and we can't both win. Only the chief executive can make those kinds of decisions. So there are knock-on negative consequences. And that's assuming that the change is accurately assessed. Of course, if the change is inaccurately assessed, You can use your imaginations to find out what happens then. So in each case, leaders had either done things they shouldn't have done or not done things they should have done. Spotting the things that they did but shouldn't have done are normally fairly easy to spot. It's the failures of omission, the things they didn't do, that can take years to play out. But their C responses were not accurate and were making the situation worse, to the point at which actually we're stuck. Once they'd got that accurate response, two organisations are persisting in trying to implement from D. Hear what you're saying, Candy, but we're going to push it over there anyway. So the implications from a change leadership perspective is change management is different to change leadership. You can delegate change management, but somebody has to decide what to change and what to change to and how to cause the change. Then you can give it to a change manager to go and implement. But the change leadership can only come from the very top. Organisations are interdependent, so strategic change decisions can't safely be taken in a silo without adverse consequences. It can't be functionally delegated without causing a fight in the organisation lower down. Continuously responding, this isn't about change once every 10 years anymore. I'm sure you'll have heard that at seminars before, that actually change is constant now. So that ability to respond to unplanned change at the drop of a hat is becoming more and more critical. It's a continuous disruptor of planned strategy. I've got my strategy, it's published, we're doing this, but the market's doing something completely different. So that failure to lead organisation, second order change causing paralysis. But my question is, if we came up to senior leadership roles through a silo, which we do, through department management, cost, efficiency, fighting for my budget, fighting for local change in my business plan, give it all to me, I'm the one you're going to promote, then how on earth do they learn change leadership competencies at a systems level? You can start to see why that first order paradigm is so dominant. Rather abruptly, that's it.